read last week. This has thrown me off a little bit. So at the end of last week when we were reading, Stanley had been tossed the bag of sunflower seeds and it had spilled all in his hole, and Mr. Sir had come and he'd gotten into Mr. Sir's truck, and now they were going to the warden's cabin. That was pretty scary. It was pretty spooky how it ended last time. And I saw a really cool picture of the warden that Zoe drew this week. Hi, Mariah! And it was amazing. We have a couple of pictures. I think we're going to post them tomorrow. That includes Mariah's bumpy lizard that I really like. I really like how you put the texture into it, Mariah. It was so cool. Yeah, we're going to post some of those tomorrow. And this week, I made another cool craft idea that we are going to do after we read this week. But yeah, it's going to be fun. Man, oh man. This is a wild start. But we are on chapter 20. Oh my goodness. I think there's 50 chapters in this book, so we might be halfway through by the end of our reading today, which would be really awesome. Okay. Everyone comfy? It felt good to walk in the shade of the 2 oak trees. Stanley wondered if this was how a condemned man felt on his way to jail, appreciating all the good things in life for the last time. They had to step around holes to get to the cabin door. Stanley was surprised to see so many holes around the cabin. He would have expected the warden to not want the campers digging so close to her home. But several holes were right up against the cabin wall, and they were all different shapes and sizes. Mr. Sir knocked on the door. Stanley still held the empty sack. "Yes," the warden said, opening the door. "There's been a little trouble out on the lake," Mr. Sir said. "Caveman will tell you all about it." The warden stared at Mr. Sir a moment, and then her gaze turned towards Stanley. He felt nothing but dread now. "Come in, I suppose," said the warden. "You're letting the cold out." It was air-conditioned inside her cabin. The television was going. She picked up the remote and she turned it off. She sat down on the canvas chair. She was barefoot today and wearing shorts. Her legs were as freckled as her face and arms. "So, what is it you have to tell me?" Stanley took a breath to steady himself. "Well, while Mr. Sir was filling canteens, I snuck into the truck and I stole his sack of sunflower seeds." "I see." She turned to Mr. Sir. "That's why you brought him here?" "Yes, but I think he's lying. I think someone else stole the sack, and Caveman's covering up for X-Ray or somebody. It was a 20-pound sack, and he claims to have eaten them all by himself." He took the sack from Stanley and handed it to the warden. "I see," the warden said again. "The sack wasn't full," said Stanley, "and I spilled a lot. You can check in my hole." "In that room, Caveman, there's a small flowered case. Will you get it for me, please?" She pointed to a door. Stanley looked at the door, and then at the warden, and then back at the door. He slowly walked toward it. Inside it was kind of like a dressing room, with a sink and a mirror, and next to the sink he saw the case. It was white, with pink roses. He brought it back out to the warden, and she set it on the glass coffee table in front of her. She unclasped the latch and opened the case. It was a makeup case. Stanley's mother had one similar to it, and inside he saw several bottles of nail polish remover, and a couple of lipstick tubes, and other jars and powders. The warden held up a small jar of dark red nail polish. "You see this, Caveman?" He nodded. "This is my special nail polish. Do you see the dark, rich color? You can't buy that from a store. I have to make it myself." Stanley had no idea why she was showing it to him. He wondered why the warden would ever need to wear nail polish or makeup. Do you want to know my secret ingredient? He raised and lowered one shoulder. The warden opened the bottle. Rattlesnake venom. Oh, that's scary. With a small paintbrush, she began applying it to the nails on her left hand. It's perfectly harmless when it's dry. She finished her left hand and she waved it in the air for a few seconds and then began painting the nails on her right hand. It's only toxic while it's wet. She finished painting her nails and then stood up. She reached over and touched Stanley's face with her fingers. She ran her sharp, wet nails very gently down his cheek, and he felt the skin tingle. The nail on her pinky just barely touched the wound behind his ear, and a sharp sting of pain caused him to jump back. The warden turned to face Mr. Sir, who was sitting on the fireplace hearth. So, you think he stole your sunflower seeds? No, he says he stole them, but I think it was... She stepped toward him and struck him on the face. Mr. Sir stared at her. He had 3 long red marks slanting across the left side of his face. Stanley didn't know if the redness was caused by her nail polish or by blood. It took a moment for the venom to sink in, and then suddenly Mr. Sir screamed and clutched his face with both hands. The warden spoke softly. I don't especially care about your sunflower seeds. Mr. Sir moaned. For a second, Mr. Sir's pain seemed to recede. He took several long, deep breaths. The warden turned to Stanley. I suggest you go back to your hole now. Stanley started to go, but Mr. Sir was laying on the floor in the way. Stanley could see the muscles on his face jump and twitch. In pain, Stanley stepped carefully over him. Is he... Excuse me, said the warden. Stanley was too frightened to speak. Oh, he'll be okay, the warden said. Unfortunately for you. The warden is so mean! Oh my goodness, we did not know she was that mean in the last chapter, but that is mean and scary. Ah. Oh, I think I see Zoe here. Is that Zoe watching? Hi, buddy. If you've tuned in and I haven't said hi to you, tell me who's watching in the comments on Instagram, and then I'll be able to say hi. Whew. The warden is very scary. Chapter 21. It was a long walk back to his hole. Stanley looked out through the haze of heat and dirt at the other boys lowering and raising their shovels. Group D was the farthest away. He realized that once again he would be digging long after everyone else had quit. He hoped he'd finish before Mr. Sir recovered. He didn't want to be out there alone with Mr. Sir. He'll be fine, the warden had said. Unfortunately for you. Walking across the desolate wasteland, Stanley thought about his great-great-grandfather. Not the pig stealer, but the pig stealer's son, the one who was robbed by Kissin' Kate Barlow. He tried to imagine how he must have felt after Kissin' Kate had left him stranded in the desert. It probably wasn't a whole lot different from the way he himself felt right now. Kate Barlow had left his great-grandfather to face the hot, barren desert. The warden had left Stanley to face Mr. Sir. Hi, Zoe. I thought that was you. Somehow his great-grandfather had survived for 17 days in the desert before he was rescued by a couple of rattlesnake hunters. He was insane when they found him. When he was asked how he'd lived so long, he'd said he found refuge on God's thumb. He spent nearly a month in a hospital, and he ended up marrying one of the nurses. Nobody ever knew what he meant by God's thumb, including himself. Stanley heard a twitching sound. He stopped in mid-step, with one foot still in the air. A rattlesnake lay coiled beneath his foot. Its tail was pointed upward, rattling. Stanley backed his leg away and then turned and ran. The rattlesnake didn't chase after him. It had rattled its tail to warn him to stay away. Thanks for the warning, Stanley whispered as his heart pounded. The rattlesnake would be a lot more dangerous if it didn't have a rattle. Hey, caveman, called Armpit. You're still alive! What did the warden say? Asked X-Ray. What'd you tell her? Asked Magnet. I told her I stole the seeds, said Stanley. Good going, said Magnet. And what'd she do? Asked Zigzag. Stanley shrugged one shoulder. Nothing. She got mad at Mr. Syrup for bothering her. He didn't feel like going into details. If he didn't talk about it, then maybe it didn't happen. He went over to his hole, and to his surprise, it was nearly finished. He stared at it amazed. It didn't make sense. Or perhaps it did. He smiled. Since he'd taken the blame for the sunflower seeds, he realized the other boys had dug his hole for him. Hey, thanks, he said. Don't look at me, said X-Ray. Confused, Stanley looked around, from Magnet to Armpit to Zigzag to Squid. None of them took credit for it. And then he turned to Zero, who'd been quietly digging in his hole since Stanley's return. Zero's hole was a lot smaller than all the others. Even though Stanley wasn't nice to him, Zero helped out and dug Stanley's hole because he realized that wasn't fair what happened. That was pretty nice of him. Chapter 22. Stanley was the first one finished digging. He spat in his hole and then he showered and changed into his cleaner set of clothes. It had been 3 days since the laundry was done, so even his clean set was dirty and smelly. Tomorrow, these would become his work clothes and the other set would be washed. He could think of no reason why Zero would dig his hole for him. Zero didn't even get any of the sunflower seeds. I guess he likes to dig holes, Armpit had said. He's a mole, Zigzag had said. I think he eats the dirt. Moles don't eat dirt, X-Ray had pointed out. Worms eat dirt. Hey, Zero, Squid had asked. Are you a mole or a worm? Zero had said nothing. Stanley never even thanked him, but now as he sat on his cot and waited for Zero to return to the shower room, he thought about it. Thanks, he said as Zero entered through the tent flap. Zero glanced at him and then went over to the crates where he deposited his dirty clothes and towel. Why did you help me? Stanley asked. Zero turned around. You didn't steal the sunflower seeds, he said. So, neither did you, said Stanley. Zero stared at him. His eyes seemed to expand, and it was almost as if Zero was looking right through him. And you didn't steal the sneakers, he said. Stanley said nothing. He watched Zero walk out of the tent. If anybody had X-ray vision, it was Zero. Wait, he called, and then he hurried out after him. Zero had stopped just outside the tent, and Stanley almost ran into him. I'll try to teach you to read if you want, Stanley offered. I don't know if I know how to teach, but I'm not that worn out today since you dug a lot of my hole. A big smile spread across Zero's face. They returned to the tent, where they were less likely to be bothered. Stanley got his box of stationery out and a pen from his crate, and they sat on the ground. Do you know the alphabet? Stanley asked. For a second, he thought he saw a flash of defiance in Zero's eyes, but then it passed. I think I know some of it, Zero said. A, B, C, D. Keep going, said Stanley. Zero's eyes looked upward. E, F, said Stanley. G, said Zero, and he blew some air out of the side of his mouth. H, I, K, P. H-I-J-K-L, Stanley said. That's right, said Zero. I've heard it before. I just don't have it memorized exactly. That's all right, said Stanley. Here, I'll say the whole thing, just to kind of refresh your memory, and then you can try it. He recited the alphabet for Zero, and then Zero repeated it without a single mistake. Not bad for a kid who'd never even seen Sesame Street. Well, I've heard it before somewhere, Zero said, trying to act like it was nothing, but his big smile gave him away. The next step was harder. Stanley had to figure out how to teach him how to recognize each letter. He gave Zero a piece of paper and took a piece for himself. I guess we'll start with letter A. He printed a capital A and then Zero copied it on his sheet of paper. The paper wasn't lined, which made it more difficult, but Zero's A wasn't bad, just a little big. Stanley told them he needed to write smaller or else they'd run out of paper really quick. Zero printed it smaller. Actually, there's 2 ways to write each letter, Stanley said, as he realized this was going to be even harder than he thought. That's a capital A, but usually you'll see a small a. You only have capitals at the beginning of a word and only if it's at the start of a sentence or if it's a proper noun, like a name. Zero nodded as if he understood, but Stanley knew he hadn't made very much sense. He printed a lowercase a and Zero copied it. So there are 52, said Zero. Stanley didn't know what he was talking about. Instead of 26 letters, there's really 52. Stanley looked at him, surprised. I guess that's right. How'd you figure that out? He asked. Zero said nothing. Did you add? Zero said nothing. Did you multiply? That's just how many there are, said Zero. Stanley raised and lowered one shoulder. He didn't even know how Zero knew there were 26 in the first place. Did he count them as he recited them? He had Zero write a few more upper and lowercase a's and then he moved on to capital B. This was going to take a long time, he realized. You can teach me 10 letters a day, suggested Zero. 5 capitals and 5 smalls, and after 5 days, I'll know them all. Except on the last day, I'll have to do 12, 6 capitals and 6 smalls. Again, Stanley stared at him, amazed that he was able to figure that all out. Zero must have thought he was staring for a different reason because he said, I'll dig a part of your hole every day. I can dig for about an hour and then you can teach me for an hour, and since I'm a faster digger anyway, our holes will get done at about the same time, and I won't have to wait for you. Okay, Stanley agreed. And as Zero was printing his B's, Stanley asked him how he figured out it would take 5 days. Did you multiply? Did you divide? That's just what it is, Zero said. That's good math, said Stanley. I'm not stupid, Zero said. I know everybody thinks I am. I just don't like answering their questions. Later that night, as he lay on his cot, Stanley reconsidered the deal he'd made with Zero. Getting a break every day would be a relief, but he knew X-Ray wouldn't like it. He wondered if there might be some way Zero would agree to dig part of X-Ray's hole as well. But then again, why should he? I'm the one teaching Zero. I need the break so I'll have energy to teach him. I'm the one who took the blame for the sunflower seeds, and I'm the one who Mr. Sir is mad at. He closed his eyes, and the images from the warden's cabin floated inside his head. Her red fingernails, Mr. Sir on the floor in pain, her flowered makeup kit. He opened his eyes wide. He suddenly realized where he'd seen the gold tube before. He'd seen it in his mother's bathroom, and he'd seen it again in the warden's cabin. It was half of a lipstick container. KB. And it shows us the KB symbol again that was on the gold tube that they found in the hole. So that means that golden tube they found in the hole was a lipstick case. KB. He felt a jolt of astonishment. His mouth silently formed the name Kate Barlow, as he wondered if it really could have belonged to the Kissin' Outlaw. Ooh! So Stanley thinks the lipstick case might belong to Kissin' Kate Barlow. Crazy. That's interesting. Maybe that's a clue about what the warden's looking for. Now this chapter, chapter 23, is cool because we're going back in time. 110 years ago, Green Lake was the largest lake in Texas. It was full of clear, cool water, and it sparkled like a giant emerald in the sun. It was especially beautiful in the spring when the peach trees, which lined the shore, bloomed with pink and rose-colored blossoms. There was always a town picnic on the 4th of July. They'd play games, dance, sing, and swim in the lake to keep cool. Prizes were awarded for the best peach pie and the best peach jam. A special prize was given every year to Miss Kathleen Barlow for her fabulous spiced peaches. No one else even tried to make spiced peaches because they knew none could be as delicious as hers. Are we sure this is where Camp Green Lake is? Oh my goodness. Every summer, Miss Catherine would pick bushels of peaches and preserve them in jars with cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, and other spices, which she kept secret. The jarred peaches would last all winter. They probably would have lasted a lot longer than that, but they were always eaten by the end of winter. It was said that Green Lake was heaven on earth and that Miss Catherine's spiced peaches were food for the angels. Catherine Barlow was the town's only school teacher. She taught in the old one-room schoolhouse. It was old even then. The roof leaked and the windows wouldn't open. The door hung crooked on its bent hinges. She was a wonderful teacher, full of knowledge and full of life. The children loved her. She taught classes in the evening for adults, and many of the adults loved her as well. She was very pretty. Her classes were often full of young men who were a lot more interested in the teacher than they were in getting an education. But all they ever got was an education. One such man was Trout Walker. His real name was Charles Walker, but everyone called him Trout because his 2 feet smelled like a couple of fish. This wasn't entirely Trout's fault. He had an incurable foot fungus. In fact, it was the same foot fungus that 110 years later would afflict the famous ball player Clyde Livingston. But at least Clyde Livingston showered every day. "I take a bath every Sunday morning," Trout would brag, "whether I need to or not." Most everyone in the town of Green Lake expected Miss Catherine to marry Trout Walker. He was the son of the richest man in the county. His family owned the most peach trees and all the land on the east side of the lake. Trout often showed up at night school but never paid attention. He talked in class and was disrespectful of the students around him. He wasn't very smart, and he was very loud. A lot of men in town were not educated, but that didn't bother Miss Catherine. She knew that they'd spent most of their lives working on farms and ranches and hadn't had much time for schooling. That was why she was there, to help teach them. But Trout didn't want to learn. He seemed to be proud of not knowing much. "How would you like to ride on my new boat this Saturday?" he asked her one evening after class. "No, thank you," said Miss Catherine. "We've got a brand new boat," he said. "You don't even have to row it." "Yes, I know," said Miss Catherine. Everyone in town had seen and heard the Walkers' new boat. It made a horrible loud noise and spewed ugly black smoke over the beautiful lake. Trout had always gotten everything he ever wanted. He found it hard to believe that Miss Catherine had turned him down. He pointed his finger at her and said, "No one ever says no to Charles Walker." "I believe I just did," said Catherine Barlow. "I kind of like Catherine Barlow. She doesn't listen to any bossy pantses, and she's in her community to help people learn and help take care of them. She sounds like a nice lady." Now we're on chapter 24, and we're back in the future again. Stanley was half asleep as he got in line for breakfast, but the sight of Mr. Sir woke him right up. The left side of Mr. Sir's face had swollen to the size of half a cantaloupe. There were 3 dark purple lines running down his cheek where the warden had scratched him. The other boys in Stanley's tent had obviously seen Mr. Sir as well, but they had the good sense not to say anything. Stanley put a carton of juice and a plastic spoon on his tray. He kept his eyes down and he hardly breathed as Mr. Sir ladled some oatmeal-like stuff into his bowl. He brought his tray to the table. Behind him, a boy from one of the other tents said, "Hey, what happened to your face?" There was a crash. Stanley turned around to see the boy's breakfast all over the floor. "Is something wrong with my face?" The boy tried to speak but couldn't. Mr. Sir was right in his face. "Does anyone see anything wrong with my face?" he asked, and he continued to stare right at the boy. Nobody said anything. Mr. Sir walked away from the boy and stepped over his breakfast and left. "How does my face look now?" he said from the doorway. "Fine," the boy said. "I'm kind of handsome, don't you think?" "Yes, Mr. Sir." Out on the lake, the other boys asked Stanley what he knew about Mr. Sir's face, but Stanley just shrugged and kept digging his hole. If he didn't talk about it, maybe it would go away. He worked as hard and as fast as he could, not trying to pace himself. He just wanted to get off the lake and away from Mr. Sir as soon as possible. Besides, he knew he'd get a break. "Whenever you're ready, just let me know," Zero had said. The first time the water truck came, it was driven by Mr. Pendanski. The second time, Mr. Sir was driving. No one said anything except, "Thank you, Mr. Sir," as he filled each canteen. No one even dared to look at his face. As Stanley waited, he ran his tongue over the roof of his mouth and inside his cheeks. His mouth was as dry as a parched lake, and as parched as the lake. The bright sun reflected off of the side mirror of the truck, and Stanley had to shield his eyes with his hand. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," said Magnet as he took his canteen from him. "Are you thirsty, caveman?" Mr. Sir had asked. "Yes, Mr. Sir," Stanley said, handing his canteen to him. Mr. Sir opened the nozzle and the water flowed out of the tank, but it did not go in Stanley's canteen. Instead, he held the canteen right next to the stream of water. Stanley watched the water splatter on the dirt where it was quickly absorbed by the thirsty ground. Mr. Sir let the water run for about 30 seconds and then he stopped. "You want some more?" he asked. Stanley didn't say anything. Mr. Sir turned the water back on, and again Stanley watched it pour in the dirt. "There, that should be plenty." He handed Stanley back his empty canteen. Stanley stared at the dark spot on the ground, which quickly shrank before his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Sir," he said. "Oh no, Mr. Sir's not being very nice." Okay, I think we can read one more chapter. Let's see. Chapter 25, and we're back in time again. There was a doctor in the town of Green Lake 110 years ago. His name was Dr. Hawthorne, and whenever people got sick, they would go see Doc Hawthorne, but they would also see Sam, the Onion Man. "Onions, sweet fresh onions," Sam would call as he and his donkey, Mary Lou, walked up and down the dirt roads of Green Lake. Mary Lou pulled a cart full of onions. Sam's onion field was somewhere on the other side of the lake. Once or twice a week, he would row across the lake and pick a new batch to fill the cart. Sam had big, strong arms, but it would still take all day for him to row across the lake and another day for him to return. Most of the time, he would leave Mary Lou in a shed, which the walkers let him use at no charge, but sometimes he would take Mary Lou on the boat with him. Sam claimed that Mary Lou was almost 50 years old, which was, and still is, extraordinarily old for a donkey. "She eats nothing but raw onions," Sam would say, holding up a white onion between his dark fingers. "It's nature's magic vegetable. If a person ate nothing but raw onions, he could live to be 200 years old." Sam was not much older than 20, so nobody was quite sure that Mary Lou was really as old as he said she was. How would he know? Still, nobody argued with Sam, and whenever they were sick, they would go not only to Doc Hawthorne, but also to Sam. Sam always gave the same advice: eat plenty of onions. He said that onions were good for digestion, the liver, the stomach, the lungs, the heart, the brain. If you don't believe me, just look at Mary Lou here. She's never been sick a day in her life. He also had many different ointments, lotions, syrups, and pastes, all made out of onion juice and different parts of the onion plant. This one cured asthma. This one was for warts and pimples. Another was a remedy for arthritis. He even had a special ointment, which he claimed would cure baldness. Just rub it on your husband's head every night while he's sleeping, Mrs. Collingwood, and soon his hair will be as thick and long as Mary Lou's tail. Doc Hawthorne was not bothered by Sam. The folks of Green Lake were afraid to take chances, and they would get regular medicine from Doc Hawthorne and onion concoctions from Sam. After they got over their illness, no one could be sure, not even Doc Hawthorne, which of the two treatments had done the trick. Doc Hawthorne was almost completely bald, and in the morning, his head often smelled like onions. Whenever Catherine Barlow bought onions, she always bought an extra one or two and would let Mary Lou eat them out of her hand. Is something wrong? Sam asked her one day when she was feeding Mary Lou. You seemed distracted. Oh, just the weather, said Miss Catherine. It looks like rain clouds are moving in. Me and Mary Lou, we like the rain, said Sam. Oh, I like it fine, said Miss Catherine as she rubbed the donkey's rough hair on top of its head. It's just that the roof leaks in the schoolhouse. I can fix that, said Sam. What are you going to do? Catherine joked. Fill the holes with onion paste? Sam laughed. I'm good with my hands, he told her. I built my own boat. If it leaked, I'd be in big trouble. Catherine couldn't help but notice that he had strong, firm hands, and they made a deal. He agreed to fix the leaky roof in exchange for 6 jars of spiced peaches. It took Sam a week to fix the roof because he could only work in the afternoons, after school let out, and before night classes began. Miss Catherine usually stayed in the schoolhouse grading papers and such, while Sam worked on the roof. She enjoyed what little conversation they were able to have, shouting up and down to each other. She was surprised by his interest in poetry, and when he took a break, she would sometimes read a poem to him. On more than one occasion, she would start to read a poem by Poe or Longfellow, only to hear him finish it for her, from his memory. She was sad when the roof was finished. Is something wrong? He asked. No, you did a wonderful job, she said. It's just that the windows won't open. The children and I would enjoy a breeze now and then. I can fix that, said Sam. She gave him 2 more jars of peaches, and Sam fixed the windows. It was easier to talk to him when he was working on the windows. He told her about his secret onion field on the other side of the lake, where the onions grow all year round and the water runs uphill. When the windows were fixed, she complained that her desk wobbled. I can fix that, said Sam. And the next time she saw him, she mentioned that the door doesn't hang straight. And she got to spend another afternoon with him while he fixed the door. By the end of the first semester, Onion Sam had turned the old run-down schoolhouse into a well-crafted, freshly painted jewel of a building that the whole town was proud of. People passing by would stop and admire it. That's our schoolhouse. It shows how much we value education here in Green Lake. The only person who wasn't happy with it was Miss Catherine. She'd run out of things that needed to be fixed. She sat on her desk one afternoon listening to the pitter-patter of rain on the roof. No water leaked in the classroom except for a few drops that came from her eyes. Onions, hot sweet onions, Sam called out on the street. She ran to him. She wanted to throw her arms around him but couldn't bring herself to do it, so instead she hugged Mary Lou's neck. Is something wrong? He asked her. Oh, Sam, she said. My heart is breaking. I can fix that, said Sam, and he hugged her. Because of the rain, there was nobody else out on the street, and even if there was, Catherine and Sam wouldn't have noticed. They were lost in their own world. But at that moment, however, Hattie Parker stepped out of the general store. They didn't see her, but she saw them, and she pointed her finger in their direction and whispered, "You will be punished." Not good, but that's the end of this chapter. Now, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I know the end of that chapter is a little hard, but a long time ago, if you were someone who sold onions, so your job was selling onions, and if you were doing a job like being a teacher or a judge or what's another career I can think of? If you were doing something like teaching people, then you weren't really allowed to marry each other. It was kind of not allowed. So that's why people were saying that they thought Catherine would marry that mean Trout guy because his parents owned a lot of land and she was a teacher, so they figured they would get married. So I know that's a little confusing, but if you have more questions about that, you can ask me and I can answer them. I'll wait for a second too to see if I get any more questions. This was kind of a heavy-duty few chapters. These are the kind of chapters I like to read when we're together, so you guys can stop me if you need me to talk about anything. I'm trying to think of what else. The warden's nail polish was pretty scary. And the warden's not being very nice, that was not great too. Oh, hopefully it gets better in the next couple chapters. If anybody has questions, let me know. But I'll show you the activity that I thought of today, or for this week. And I put a printable on Facebook if you would like to use the printable, but this would be easy to do without the printable too. What we have is, I want you guys to grab a toilet paper roll, and what we're doing is we are making a boy to dig the hole. So your toilet paper roll turns into a hole for your person to dig in. Oh my goodness. And on the outside of the hole, I have, well, the kids at my house made me some purple lizards, but you can make yellow spotted lizards with their red tongues. We've got sunflower seeds, piles of dirt, lots of stuff, more dirt. And I thought this would be a cool craft, so you can decorate your hole and then your person that is digging the hole. And you can color whoever you want, whichever boy or person you've been thinking of. You could do armpit or magnet or zero. I think my kids made them into themselves. I think this is a little Gabe and this is a little Henry, which is pretty funny. But actually, I think the people who dig the holes wear orange clothing, if I remember correctly. So that's pretty cool. But if you don't have a printer at home, that's totally fine. You could just cut out your own person. And I didn't have popsicle sticks or anything at my house, so I just have a stick from my backyard. And I taped it on. And then you could cut out your own little lizards and sunflower seeds. Or maybe you even have sunflower seeds at home right now. You could just glue real ones on the outside. That would be really cool. But then you can pretend your little character is digging your hole. Because these chapters were just a lot of digging, wasn't it? It was wild. Now we know why this story is called Holes. Let's see if there's anything else I wanted to remind you of. I think that's it. I think that's about it. The only thing that I wanted you guys to think about, I really liked in these chapters how Stanley started remembering how he is usually, remembered that he's a friendly guy, and he started helping Zero out. But a question I wanted you all to think about was, what would you have done if you were Stanley and the sunflower seeds had fallen in your hole? Would you have taken the blame for that happening? Would you have told the truth? I just think that's a cool thing to think about. What do you think you would have done in that situation? So, if you have any questions, parents too, if any of the people watching have questions and you'd like me to answer them or talk about them more, you can email me too at children@shelburne.library.ca, and we could email back and forth if there's anything they want to talk about what we read today, because some of that stuff was kind of sad that we read about. But yeah, other than that, have fun making your holes craft today. And anybody who joined in late, we're going to post this video on Facebook so that you can catch up and watch later. That was lots of fun, guys. I'll see you next Tuesday at 3:30. Bye, everybody.